And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter on this brand new week, February 9th. It is Monday here at Blaze Media. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, here to discuss the issue exposing toxic foods. Pretty big issue, wouldn't you say, in the top 5, top 10 issues affecting our civilization, economy, health. We've had endless alphabet agencies out of HHS, EPA for so long, stifling innovation, costly regulations. You would think at a minimum we would have safe food, but we don't. And it appears like it's worse than we even thought. We're going to have coming up later today First Lady of Florida, Casey DeSantis, to discuss exposing food toxins. This is a big deal. Florida is doing kind of shockingly what no one else is doing, what should have been done for decades. I mean, after all, isn't this why we have departments of health to actually test foods for toxins? And we're not even talking about processed foods in terms of, hey, maybe they're not healthy calories. I mean, that's for sure. We're talking about arsenic, glyphosate. I mean, I don't even understand how this gets off the ground and how this isn't one of the biggest national issues. A lot of people have been suspecting this and fighting this for a while, but Florida is really the first state to take up this mantle. So I really want to focus on that as the main course today, partly because, one of the things about this show is I feel like we've been the most successful during COVID when we talked about personal health, what you can do. Because frankly, as it relates to geopolitical issues, legal issues, changing laws, changing policies, we don't have a field on the team. We're sort of like the New England Patriots versus the Seahawks last night. Uh, you know, our team of Patriots, we don't have a Patriot team on the playing field. So one side is running the table and we can't seem to get anything done. But as it relates to just exposing public health issues, now, obviously, when it comes to vaccines, other things, we're fighting mandates and it does get into legal authorities and policies and liability. But at a minimum, when it comes to health, there is a lot we can do if we're empowered with the right information. So this is something I'm looking more to get into. Obviously, we're going to keep having shows on vaccines and trying to get to the bottom of how much of it or what type of vaccines might cause autism, things like that. Uh, at a minimum, we could be empowered to take our own destiny in our own hands, regardless of what government does or doesn't do. So I do want to get back to food just real briefly on politics. And this is why it's just so frustrating that we don't have a team on the field, that conservatives are trapped in the contaminated body of the Republican Party that stands for nothing, dips our issues in feces, makes them unpopular, and then we get crushed in an election without even dying on our own hills, things we don't even believe in. So we're starting off this week where 11 of the 12 budget bills have been passed, and DHS funding runs out at the end of the week. So this appropriations fight with a looming possible partial shutdown of DHS should set up an entire week of Trump and Republicans talking about things like the Amish family murdered by this illegal alien truck driver in Indiana, talking about the sanctuary cities, the sanctuary corrupt judges, the need to finally put American culture, American sovereignty, and the American worker first. That should be the core, to demand that these things be placed in the DHS budget bill. Again, a defunding of the court cases, the sanctuary cities, true immigration reform. But I'm not really hearing any of that. To the extent I'm seeing any political capital being expended this week, it's on the SAVE Act to require proof of identity and proof of citizenship to vote and making that a national standard. I support that. But what I don't support is the notion that Republicans are getting crushed and that Democrats are winning elections solely because of voter fraud. Certainly, it matters in the margins. We do have a lot of close races at the scrimmage line. But if that scrimmage line is not at R+1, but R+15, R+20 now, so the reason why you're losing is not because of non-citizens voting or fraudulent voting. It's because the Republican Party stinks to high heaven. It doesn't have a message, accomplished nothing. And even in the areas where they could still win, you have a bunch of loser corporatist Republicans that stand for nothing but special interests. That is why they're losing. They're allowing Democrats to outflank them on data centers, on corrupt corporatism and things like that. Don't, dangle in front of me the SAVE Act when this is the bigger problem. It's you're not accomplishing anything on the broader immigration issue, on the broader economic issues. So I don't know what's going to happen after the SAVE Act passes the House. If there is a way to grind down the filibuster by forcing them to talk through, and if somehow the Senate Republicans committed to that, then that raises the question, why aren't we using that to pass a DHS funding bill with true immigration reform and defunding sanctuary cities, which is the much broader issue that speaks to the civilization problem of immigration, which is bigger than even non-citizens voting, which is a smaller problem, and also cuts to the core of the GOP not accomplishing anything. I just don't like how that's being dangled as the issue. Let me give you an example. One of the big news stories over the weekend is Democrats swinging a state legislative seat in Louisiana, House District 50, by 37 points since the 2024 election. So Trump won that district big, yet now Democrats flipped the seat by over 20 points. They didn't just win it, but they won big. Now, do any of you really think that they lost a district in Louisiana which has photo ID requirements because of voter fraud? No, we all know it's because Republicans have zero accomplishments, zero messaging. They have incurred all of the liabilities of being the incumbent party in charge, but not reaping any of the benefits. That's why you're losing so deep into red territory, much more, by the way, than we even saw in 2018, last midterm when you had a Republican president. So this is what I don't understand, why the end all is the SAVE Act. If this is the opening bid to getting things passed, then fine. But I don't understand why DHS funding is not the first thing, because that deadline is at the end of the week. Get a DHS bill passed with true immigration reform. Again, what's the bigger issue? Having 53 million immigrants in this country, a record high, many from the third world, and the trajectory is even more, 20, 25, 30 million illegals. Is that the bigger issue? Or is the bigger issue the amount of non-citizens that actually vote in an election? It's the former that's the bigger problem in terms of driving the demographics, because over a 10-year window, and now we've had this since Hart-Celler, you have tens of millions of Democrat voters actually voting as naturalized citizens, and then eventually, second generation. That's the bigger issue as to why Republicans are losing. Republicans are losing because Republicans are a terrible party, and Democrats, because of demographics, decline of religion, decline of families, decline of proper education, they have a very high floor of support. I know it's very tempting to blame every loss on voter fraud, but again, the bigger fraud is the GOP running on our issues and then sabotaging it. That's what you need to deal with. So I'm sorry, I just don't understand this. Yeah, if the SAVE Act is the opening bid on doing more things, passing them out of the House, forcing a talking filibuster in the Senate, I'm fine with it. But then why wouldn't you start off with the DHS funding that's more imminent and more impactful of a vehicle to push broader policy? So, it is what it is. I don't get it. But I want to get back to the main topic here with food. Two more issues before we get to the First Lady: beef prices. So the president signed an executive order quadrupling our beef imports from Argentina. Now, remember, we've tariffed everything under the sun indiscriminately. And yet, on the one thing that really could justify tariffs, that you really do want to protect safe, homegrown, independent ranchers, given that they've been under the gun from federal regulation that works against them relative to the four meatpackers, the monopoly, for so long, the droughts they've been with, that would justify tariffs. Instead, that's the one issue the president is picking to, just rip the doors off the hinges, bring them in. Now, what this does is it allows the meatpacking monopoly to import beef from Argentina, then turn around and hire subsidized refugee labor to process it. So they win with cheaper cattle, cheaper labs, and this is regulatory capture. This is classic regulatory capture. We have endless regulations on meat. Well, you don't want toxins in your meat, right? You want healthy meat. Yet here we are with unhealthy processed beef from this monopoly. And yet that very system that was designed to keep us safe is boxing out the healthiest beef from natural, regenerative farmers. So we have this backwards. What Trump should be focused on is breaking the cartel of the meat packers. Instead, we're kind of screwed here with this regulatory capture. And that's really the theme today, how regulatory capture, you don't even get the benefits of safety that you're supposed to get from regulation. The other story I did want to get to is the military food. Okay, I mean, look, if there's one group of people you want to keep healthy, wouldn't it be the military? Yet there's a new report out here, this article from Ryan Morgan of the Epic Times. America's troops may be getting few of the nutrients they expect and many harmful compounds they don't. So this is in our own military, according to new lab study of military rations and meals. Now, look, obviously the MREs, we know, shelf stable. There's nothing that's that shelf stable that's going to be healthy and heck, even safe. And that kind of comes with the territory. But they also studied 16 cafeteria meal samples from 6 different military bases, and they found the same problems. The report was published February 4th that 100% of the food samples studied contain harmful pesticide residues. One sample of teriyaki beef stick tested positive for nitro imidazole, of the veterinary medication that the U.S. government actually banned for use in food producing animals. They found arsenic levels 430% higher than EPA standards for drinking waters. They found herbicides in 95% of the military meal samples. So, I don't get it. I mean, this is our own military. At a minimum, we shouldn't have garbage toxins, at least in the chow hall. So what is the purpose of this? But again, they have these contractors, obviously, that they contract with. And I mean, talk about regulatory capture. This is the problem. I don't even know how you get around it. But I want to get to the broader discussion here of the food toxins with the First Lady. So one of the things we learned during COVID is that we cannot assume that just because you have the greatest government agencies, even for decades on end, not just approving, but recommending, exalting, championing products that go in our bodies, that they're safe and that they don't contain toxins. Obviously, we started with the COVID vaccines when we saw that this was something that was recommended, funded, marketed, mandated, and it had toxins in it that potentially, depending on the person in the batch, damaged almost every organ system, particularly the heart. And then a lot of us started thinking, hey, maybe people raising concerns about the water supply and the food supply were correct. And we saw with the fluoride how you could have over a half century of recommendations that were built on lies. And fluoride is a problem at certain levels to be placed in drinking water, going into your body with no benefit. And then we start thinking about the food supply. And folks, this is what happens when you have regulatory capture, where, you could debate how much regulation you want, but if you don't have any regulation, well, you might have a private vendor come along that will be trusted and market products or approve products that have a track record. But when the FDA, the EPA, they come in for decades, I got it, give me the ball. So, they have a monopoly. You can't regulate beyond them. So we rely on them. Well, obviously, they're getting it right. So it's shocking to find out that so much of our supply of food is filled not with just unhealthy processed ingredients, but arsenic, glyphosate, poison. It just doesn't add up. And we wonder why we have a generation, 2 generations now of Americans that are battered with chronic illness, prolific cancers now, neurological disorders, so much inflammation. Well, this is obviously a starting point among other issues. So shockingly, it's taken the government of just one state, of course, Florida always leading, to vet this out. And look, if we're going to have departments of health, if we're going to have government agencies, at a minimum, their job should be, if they're going to operate in this space, to give recommendations rather than mandates. Hey, let's give some guidance. Let's test this stuff. So under the Healthy Florida First initiative, under the auspices of Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis and Surgeon General Joe Ladapo, they had a brilliant idea. Why don't we just go and test some of the foods and test the hypothesis of people that are concerned that some foods have toxins in them? And they started with baby formula and then candy and now bread, and they're moving on to other things. And the findings are utterly shocking, how some products that we've all had for decades are full of, again, not just unhealthy elements, but downright poisonous elements. So I figured we had to get to the bottom of this. If nothing else, there's nothing right or left or political about this. This is 100% a public service. ExposingToxicFoods.com. Again, a project of Healthy Florida First initiative. So with us is the director of this project, Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis. Hey, Casey, welcome back here to Conservative Review. It's been so long. Really excited to have you.
Daniel, it's great to see you. And I don't want to take full credit for a lot of what we're exposing in the free state of Florida. We've got one heck of a Surgeon General and obviously the greatest governor in America, who are wedded to this mission as well. It's just transparency and accountability.
No, I love that. If there's one thing that a health director should be doing, we saw these health directors in the States, you should shut down this and wear this mask and get a vaccine. Instead, just putting out informed consent. Here's what we're finding. Here are the studies. The Surgeon General did that with the COVID shot. And now you're going down a list of foods. I want to bring up the slide here from the bread. But first, where did you get this idea from to actually use a government agency to put out this information and test the food?
Yeah, so when the governor, Ron, decided that we wanted to do the state's version of the MAHA, right? How can we be a force multiplier to this great movement being led by Kennedy and McCary and those guys? The Surgeon General and I really got into a room. We're both very passionate about this. And we started to say, okay, what can we do? And we said, well, let's do some trust but verify, right? We want to make sure that the products that are on the market are indeed what they say that they are, and they're not contaminated with anything. And I found this out actually after we did the baby formula testing, but it reminded me of when they had the consumer reports that came out last year. And it showed that there were problematic things within the baby formula, lead and arsenic and what have you. And that caused the federal government under Kennedy to do Operation Stork Speed. You remember, we need to do more testing. So here comes the free state of Florida. And we're like, okay, but let's trust but verify, right? And we find out that there hasn't been much change at all. And honestly, since we had our results coming out, I haven't heard anything from some of these baby formula manufacturers. And so it's like, at what point in time is enough enough? Like, we're not going to settle for the fact that there's lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury, particularly in baby formula and other things. But this is something that kids are eating for the first year or two of their life. Some mothers don't have the option to be able to breastfeed. They have to rely on what's in store shelves. They go in there under a certain condition of trust, and then they find out that this stuff is happening. I mean, it's honestly, it's unconscionable and unacceptable.
So this is very scary because this is at the formulation of the baby's body, the baby's brain, where we're so careful of, pregnant
Right.
mothers to take all these vitamins. And then, I was lucky enough to have a wife who was able to breastfeed our kids, but inevitably, I know we use formula here and there. And I looked at some of the brands. So you found 24 baby formulas were tested, and 16 of them contained heavy metals exceeding safety standards. Could you give us a
Yeah.
summary of those shocking findings?
Yeah, sure. The whole thing, it's hard to come off the top of my head, but it's on foodtoxins.com. But the majority of them, of the ones that were problematic, the 16 out of the 24 had high levels of mercury. 2 had lead. These are problematic heavy metals, right? They don't just leave the body, they're there for a while. And our Surgeon General said, when you're exposed to this early in life in these quantities over the course of a year or two, your risk of getting cancer goes up exponentially, something like 20%. And so I would encourage moms and dads and grandparents to go to exposingfoodtoxins.com, because there you can see specifically which ones are better than others. And here's an important silver lining to all of this, right? And we found this with the baby formula, we found it with the candy, we found it with the bread, is that you can do it better. There are some options out there that don't have arsenic and lead and cadmium and mercury. So don't tell me it's the manufacturing process and there's nothing that we can do, because certainly there's some manufacturers that are doing it better. So we should, as consumers, push to drive change, because that's the right thing to do on behalf of families.
No, that's a really good point. Like thinking with the bread, for example, glyphosate, weed killer, being in bread. So they say, well, I mean, it's a problem in the soil, and to an extent, clearly it is. But you did not find an even result, right? Based on
Right.
on what you have here, and I just want to bring it up as you're talking. Just the list you have here. You have some of them that were considered organic weren't so
Right.
organic.
Right. I mean, so you see the ones that are there. Some had triple digit levels of glyphosate, which is the weed killer that's commonly found in Roundup. Some of them had double digits, and then some had none at all. So again, it goes back to the thing that I told you just a second ago about the silver lining. Like, we can do this better. And I think that the consumers have the right to know, so they can make informed decisions, so they can vote with their pocketbook, so to speak. And so that will drive the manufacturers, hopefully, to be able to want to produce a better product that's healthier.
What I love about this is, again, there's nothing like political left or right about this.
No.
Straight up, you're in a, you have all these things on the shelf in a supermarket, right? So one of them, you have Pepperidge Farm there, and I can tell you, I'm not getting paid by Pepperidge Farm. It's one of the brands there. Now, there's other issues with white bread, and I'm not saying it's healthy, but at a minimum, you want to buy something that doesn't have poison in it. Okay,
Right.
so this makes a difference. So my question to you, I've been dying to ask this: have any of the companies reached out and tried to either push back or say excuses or commit to maybe making changes?
Not to me, and not that I have heard of. As it pertains to the candies, like, there's a confectioners association that issued a statement that really didn't talk about. They weren't arguing over the arsenic. They were basically arguing something about the levels of arsenic, but they ceded the point that there was arsenic in candy, right? And so, no, we really haven't heard anything like, man, we're going to get this right. Yeah, we're going to really change our formula. Man, we're going to try to do better. We haven't heard any of that. And so here's what ultimately we're trying to do, right? We want to get a coalition of the states. We want to get more states to be proactive and trust but verify the integrity of the food supply. The free state of Florida is leading the charge, and we're doing great work under our Surgeon General and, of course, the governor, right? And we are more nimble, right, than the federal government. We can get in there and do things like this, but we are limited in our capacity because
Sure.
there's hundreds of thousands of food products in the market.
You don't have
So
a
what
printing
if
press.
so what if we got Oklahoma, which we've talked to them, Sarah Stitt and the governor, wonderful people. Like, they are all about this. We're talking to Georgia and Tennessee and West Virginia and Arkansas. And we say, listen, this is a responsibility that I believe the Department of Health have within the states, right? Is the well-being of their citizens, the well-being of the people who rely on the government as an independent third party to go in and do this on their behalf, not because there's any other agenda than on your health. And this is another point that I think is really important. In Florida, we've invested over $1 billion in cancer care research. We've done massive amounts for pediatrics, so no kid ever has to leave the state to get care. We're doing wonderful things here. We have the only carbon ion therapy cancer treatment in the entire Western Hemisphere here in the free state of Florida. You've covered things on the investments we've done to innovation, particularly Ivermectin, right? There's no ROI for someone to go in big and invest in Ivermectin because it's generic, right? So if it really works, are they going to see a big payoff? So where's the capital to invest in something like that? Well, that's the free state of Florida that can come in and do those sorts of things, which I think is really, really important to do. But at the end of the day, you know, we need the states to be able to come on board to help us with this mission. And we need to understand that we have to get to a preventative side of testing, or I should say a percentage side of testing, but also to look at what is causing people to get sick and to begin with. Because yes, while we're investing in cancer, what about trying to do things to prevent people from getting sick in the first place? And so I think that that's really important. Not saying that's a causation correlation, but one can surmise that if you're getting arsenic and cadmium and lead and these things out of the food supply, probably going to have a better chance of not going down the road of having cancer or some of these other sicknesses.
Yeah, I mean, this is at the systemic level. So every kid is, or, most kids are going to be exposed to some degree of formula. A lot of them, that's all they have. Candy, some less, some more. But, some of this, what you tested chocolate bars, different things. Again, some had it. I was glad to see that Hershey's, the regular bars did not have them. So I grew up with those, and Reese's Pieces, of course, did not, but others did. And it's important to know there's health concerns and then there's poison. So what I don't understand is when you're dealing with things like glyphosate and arsenic, are there things that you have it? I mean, you're looking more on the health side, but on the legal side, in terms of consumer protection laws, how you advertise a product, but and you can debate whether the product itself, prima facie, the way it's marketed, is healthy or not. But if it's being marketed the way it is, then that's not dishonesty. But if it has other ingredients in it that are poisonous, is there a way that the state maybe could look towards regulating that?
Well, that's a good question. Like, is it adulterated, right? So it says it has these ingredients, but yet it has chemicals and pesticides in it that aren't disclosed to the consumer. And that's an interesting question. I will say this about the FDA as it pertains to arsenic. There is no guidance right now as it pertains to candy in the FDA. So that might be something that they might be able to do to set levels. However, though, when we looked at the candy, right, and we said, the level is what it is, but when you're eating it in aggregate, then the problem really starts to set in. As we showed in some of our analysis, eating more than 86 nerds over the course of a year, you're exceeding the allowable threshold for arsenic within a year. But again, that doesn't come from an FDA guidance, it comes from EPA standards. And so it's really understanding that this is in the food supply. Is there a state function for it? Is there a federal role for it? I will say this, I think low-hanging fruit as it pertains to the baby formula, again, going back to the consumer reports that we saw, and then we saw Operation Stork Speed and a lot of things that have come out as a result of that. Along the way, if you remember, there was the contamination that the FDA came in and really worked with these baby manufacturers and these formulas about. That was really important, and that led to increased testing for those bacteria. Now, what about just doing some statutory reforms with the U.S. Congress to say, hey, how about we start testing for lead and arsenic and cadmium before this stuff ever leaves the factory? And I think that is really important because, if you have a company that's coming in and they unilaterally want to make decisions to do better and to test, that might mean that their cost of business is going up. But if that isn't imposed on the other businesses, the other one might be at a cost advantage, right? And they can undercut the guy that's doing it right. So that's why I think that there really is a role federally as this stuff is regulated at the federal level for the US Congress to be able to come in and honestly, like you said earlier on, like this isn't partisan. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's right versus wrong. And as it pertains to the youngest among us, we have a responsibility at the entry level of government to make sure that we're serving the taxpayer well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You're seeing the smoke at the input level early in life from all these products. We now see it. And then we see the fire later on where nobody could deny the proliferation of cancers, the chronic illness, the inflammatory illnesses, the increase in autism. And again, it's hard to know which one is causing what, but in totality, the body being bombarded with all these toxins, it's got to be responsible for some of this. But what I don't understand is why it even took Florida to do this. Are you hearing any cooperation at the federal level where, I mean, let's face it, the HHS is going to have so much more money at their disposal, and you guys were able to do this pretty quickly. Shouldn't they be able to take a genre of food and do this within maybe a few weeks or so, a month or so? Describe a little bit of what that process is like and how easy it would be for the federal government to pick up the mantle and go down the bucket list of foods.
Or to do the testing, you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can now, the resources, right? Which is why we wanted to divide and conquer with the other states to be the force multipliers, because the FDA, they have a lot of roles, right? One of them is a reactionary force, and we saw that with salmonella and everything. So when they see something come out, they then go and investigate to ensure the integrity, but it's bringing the data and the evidence to them for them to be able to look over and mull over it, right? And I think the states are so important in this equation because we're fair and impartial third parties, right? We have no other reason to do this other than the well-being of the people of the state. But, some things, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, one of the things that we want to do is to provide truth, right? We want to give people the most data that we have, the evidence, so you can make an informed decision. But when you're reading some of these websites and you're looking at this study comes out and this study comes out, you're wondering what's truth. Is that brought to you by a manufacturer that's trying to push a certain product? So is what they're saying true? Or is it funded by somebody that has an ulterior motive? And sometimes you just don't know, because some of these magazines or what have you, or publications, they're paid to place that stuff. So the equation is truth and then acting off of the evidence and the data. And so that's why, again, there's no other incentive for the free state of Florida or any of these other states to do it other than the well-being of its citizens. And so that's what I think is a good basis from which the FDA then can come in and say, yeah, we see this. Let's try to find a better way, and let's do our own independent, trust but verified testing. So it's bringing it to them so that they can be able to make some analysis and decisions on their own.
Throughout your research on this, as you're, heading up this program, have you seen more information on other parts of the world, let's say Europe, that perhaps they have less of a contamination problem, and why that would be?
That is one thing that people bring up to me more than anything else. I talk to people that say if they have the means to be able to do it, they buy their baby formula from Europe, or they buy their flour or what have you from Europe. And, if you look at a box of Cheerios, right, you see that it's flavored with cumin and these other things, or beets, and it's not necessarily these artificial dyes, or, we haven't even got into generally accepted as safe, right? The stuff that we've seen that really, Kennedy has had a problem with. And so, yeah, you've seen that over there. What I think is we have a really unique moment in history, right? Where you have the leadership federally with the president, with Kennedy, with the MAHA movement to say enough is enough. I mean, you just saw last night on the Super Bowl, right? Didn't they have an ad with Mike Tyson talking about, eat good foods, don't eat processed food? It was brought to you by a MAHA entity. And so you see that there is this push. And so if consumers want to finally drive some accountability, now is the time to do it. Now is the time to reach out to your state and demand that what's in your food, so that ultimately we can change course. Because here's what my fear is, right? And again, it goes back to the baby food manufacturers. Have I heard anything since the results came out from the free state of Florida? No, I haven't heard anything from them. And so we have a chance, I think, in history to really have the American people say enough is enough. We have the right to know what is in our food supply. There should be this testing. The states are here as force multipliers to the federal MAHA movement to ultimately change the trajectory of how the food industry works in the United States of America. And people might say that's a grandiose thing, but I think it's entry level for government.
No, it is. I think that's the key, that we're at a tipping point, an inflection point in history, because I used to always think if something was around for so long, in my naivety, it has to be safe. Someone would have exposed it, right? And then, I mean, just until 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine there was a problem with the drinking water. I heard things about fluoride. I thought it was a joke. I didn't think there was any validity to it. How could we have been doing this since the 1950s? And then, lo and behold, the federal government had a study done, and it came up in federal court that showed it is a problem to the mental development of children. And it's also unnecessary because Europe enjoyed the same benefits of, a generational decline in cavities, and most of those countries did not have fluoride in the water. And I was like, oh, I never knew that. I thought everyone had it. So it's like, these are the things that we learn, that you can't assume even what we've been doing for 50, 70 years was correct.
Right. And wasn't it COVID that brought a lot of this to our attention, right? Like, as a mom, I'm watching this stuff, and I remember Ron is out there, the governor, fighting the good fight every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I'm sitting at home with a baby at the time doing my own research and watching them say, oh, if you just wear this mask, we're going to stop the spread. And then you're seeing it's like these cloth masks are like putting a chain link fence in front of a gnat. Like, things are getting through, not to mention you're inhaling these fiberglass particles that was made, this mask in a plant in China, right? And so you start to question this stuff. Oh, if you take this vaccine that you won't get sick. And, if you just stand 6 feet away, and if we just lock kids out of school, then everything will be fine. If we shut down your business, no, by the way, the big box, they can stay open, but you, mom and pop, you got to shut down. It's like, wait a minute now. After a while, you start questioning a lot of this. And so you're right. You hear the narratives or the science, right? And we have a right to question a lot of this stuff. We have a right to be able to say, show us the evidence, show us the data. And you know what? If you don't have it, tell us that too, right? If you don't have the long-term evidence to show us the ramifications of mRNA, you should be forthcoming and say, we don't have any long-term evidence to show of any potential problematic things associated with it. So I just think it's about, there is a unique moment in history where I think we can drive this change. It's just we can't keep our feet off of the gas. Otherwise, it's going to be another blip on the radar for some of these companies. They're just going to wait for the news cycle to change. And then all of a sudden, they're not going to be forced to be able to do anything meaningful. And at the end of the day, like, I don't want anybody to go through a cancer diagnosis that I went through, right? It was hell on earth. I had babies. My littlest was 1 at the time. And, I'm lucky that I survived. It was a very aggressive form of cancer. Now, causation, correlation, right? We can point back to all of the things that might have potentially caused it, right? But it's like, we need to do the best we can to empower people with the truth, so that way they can make informed decisions. So if that can help them potentially go down a problematic road, then great, right? That's the obligation of what ultimately government should be doing on behalf of the people.
No, I mean, that's the thing. There's nothing more nonpartisan than cancer. And I cannot even enumerate how many people I know in my life associated with, neighbors. The amount of cancers among young people is just out of control. You don't even need a study anymore. Everyone sees it. And we spend more than we've ever spent. We spend close to $5 trillion as a nation in total on healthcare. Then we have these massive government regulatory agencies. So obviously what we're doing is not working. So you've done 3 genres of food so far. Are you able to tease out what else you might be looking at in the coming months?
Well, a little bit, yes, but no. Like, we, because honestly, we take the Department of Health. I mean, they're excellent, right? They're running this through third-party certified labs. Like, we are very buttoned up on this, and they're looking at very conservative risk analysis. So we make sure that all of this is good to go before we go out there, because we understand the implications of what we're putting out, for consumers to make informed decisions. And so, yes, but no. You had mentioned water. We might be looking into that, and then other things, particularly that kids are consuming, right? Because we have an obligation yes, to the people of this country and to this state, but also to the littlest among us, right? Like, I was just thinking the other day, like grandma and grandpa are sending candy to the kids, thinking that they're doing a good thing, right? We know it's not healthy, right? But we think of health as, maybe it's sugar, maybe they'll gain weight, these sort of things, they'll act out or whatever. You don't think that sending candy in this aggregate levels of exposure, can lead to really problematic things when you're looking at these levels of arsenic. And so it really changes the equation. And so, we're going to keep fighting the good fight here. That's why I appreciate you having me on to talk about it. I don't want this to be just in the news cycle and go by. It's a righteous fight to have. It is, like I said, I think what governments should be doing on behalf of the people. It's very entry level. There are a lot of good policy discussions that go on. There's a lot of good things happening, but to ensure the integrity of the food supply so people know what they're eating, I think is of the utmost importance to do. And so that's why, Ron DeSantis and our Surgeon General, myself, and others are very committed to continuing to do this and to continue to make this a part of the discourse, right? So it doesn't just go away and nothing ultimately happens as a result of it.
Yeah, what I like about it is it's black and white, because you could surmise what are the implications of it. Does it cause this much damage to this number of people? But that's not the point. If you find levels of contaminants that ought not be there, well, they ought not be there, and people should know about that. This is what we learned during COVID. They would often make us prove through the scientific method 100% that this number of people will die from. Well, no, it's the other way around. You have to prove affirmatively that it's safe. And if we see it has contaminants in it, that in itself is a problem. Aside from testing foods, are there any other hypotheses that you're going to look at researching and testing in this pursuit of trying to get to the bottom of the explosion of chronic illness, autism, inflammatory diseases, and cancers?
I think that, first of all, our Surgeon General, yes. I mean, he's one of the best Surgeon Generals in the country. And I think anything that he can do to shine light on it, he's going to do it in full force. And just as a general principle with this whole thing, right? Everything that we're trying to do, I am pro-empowerment of the truth, right? Pro-empowerment of the facts and the evidence that we have to the best of our ability so that parents can make informed decisions. That's on everything that they come in contact with, whether it's food, whether it's beauty products, which is a whole other ball of wax, right? To anything medical, what have you. I think it's important that we are just providing that platform to give people the best ability to make the best choices that they can.
Informed consent. I mean, that's the core of the Nuremberg protocol, that we have certain values, that human beings are not lab rats. And obviously we have a lot of products out that were very convenient, and that's fine, but people ought to know the risk-benefit analysis, or at least enough information that they can make that own determination. Like, for example, when I was growing up, we only had glasses, real glasses to drink from. But then, when I got married and we had kids, I mean, they're forever consuming these plastic cups, and it's hard. And it would be nice to know, I mean, how many are they all a problem? Some of them are there different levels of microplastics? Like that's another one I would love to see tested.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for that one.
Okay.
Right. That's all I'll say is you're right, because it's a concern that a lot of people have. Our entire environment is full of plastics. And so, if something is sitting in a hot car or whatever, are we getting trace particles of microplastics? And so, there might be some news that we might have about that coming up.
Awesome. Before I let you go, I just want to go back to the cancer funding so people understand what's going on here. So, obviously we have these spectacular new drugs that are very expensive, and they may work or not work to varying degrees. So all of the research which requires funding will go behind something that will have a huge ROI. Exactly. What we found during COVID, obviously, that you have nascent research often, maybe they're animal studies, maybe they're, not fully double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials, but different studies that show mechanistically potential benefits of common drugs, cheap drugs, generic drugs that have been around that are pretty safe, much safer than chemotherapy. But, we don't have a way of testing it, because if it really would help, obviously big pharma companies are not going to want that news to get out. So describe this initiative of how you're trying to be that force multiplier, where to use government funding where naturally we might not have the funding to test the hypothesis that some are putting out that there might be some generic drugs, used anti-parasitic, antifungal, or whatever else that might have action against tumors.
I think that this is so important, and that's what we've done in Florida. So it's the Innovation Fund. It is a part of a bigger package of funding. Like I told you, we've done stuff for pediatrics to try to provide more opportunities for kids and some of our big, really well-established and great hospital systems within the state. But yeah, the Innovation Fund is unique. They are people who can apply in Florida primarily to the Department of Health for a grant. We do these grants quarterly, which I think is really important. We don't wait for the fiscal year, right? Because we're at war with cancer. We need to move quickly. So if somebody has a technique, an innovation, a procedure, or what have you, they're able to write a grant application specifically to the Department of Health. If it beat muster, then of course, obviously they'll issue it out there. But you're right. Ivermectin is a really important one because it's generic form. I think you would know this better than me. A pill costs what, like, a few cents, right? You're not, if it is beneficial to the people, is there a big ROI, a return on the investment for someone to invest in this, to spend a lot of money up front, knowing on the back end, there's not going to be a huge ROI, again, because it's generic. So this is a unique and I think important role for the states, because who, again, are the states working for? The people, the well-being of the people of the state. And so therefore, if ivermectin works out, great, we can save more lives. And that's what it's about. So, and it goes beyond, things like ivermectin. And, we saw some of this with Mel Gibson talking on Joe Rogan's podcast about how he saw people who had, stage 4 cancer. It was so great. Like we should investigate that sort of stuff, which, is really important. But other things that we've done through this Innovation Fund is looking at like the value of fasting. Right? What is, we hear all of the chirping, right? About if time restricted eating, or if you don't eat for a day, or you do this, that, or the other. Does that really hold benefits? Does that allow your body to be able to repair itself? And so is there any money to be made in fasting? Probably not, right? Can you package it in a pill? Probably not. And so looking into the true benefits from an independent third party that has nothing to gain other than the well-being of the people of the state, yeah, that's where the Innovation Fund sets in. And I've heard from a lot of people that they were so appreciative that they were able to get oxygen in the form of money to be able to go look into stuff when they had gone other routes and they just hit brick walls. And so therefore, there's a lot of really good stuff out there happening. It just needs to be brought to the surface. And that's one of the benefits of what the Innovation Fund allows people to do.
Lean and nimble, because the bottom line is we cannot determine what works, what doesn't. I don't know. But what I do know is even if someone would come up with something that really worked well against cancer and really didn't have many side effects, we know it wouldn't get published in the big journals. That's the problem. And that's really how the industry works. They have the gatekeepers. So you guys are trying to say, look, we're going to be that net to go and hunt around. If there's anything that works even 20%, but has no side effects or very little side effects, people ought to know about that. They ought to know about the negative. They ought to know about the positive. Yes. I love this holistic approach. Again, exposingtoxicfoods.com. That's the website. Anywhere else? Obviously, the Florida Department of Health.
Yeah, but the best way to go is to that website because it lays it out. It shows you the levels. It shows you the brands. It shows you which ones are better than others. And again, I think the closing silver lining of a lot of this, it's not inevitable. It doesn't have to be this way. There are companies that we can see, whether it's the candy, whether it's the bread or the baby formula, they are doing it right. So what the consumer should strive to do is expect that these companies change course so that they provide better products to consumers. And so that way, when you go into the store, it shouldn't be up to you to have to go through and figure out ultimately which product is better than the other. You should go in there knowing that the manufacturer wants to have a better product on the store shelves because that is what is demanded by the consumer. And that should be an expectation going forward.
Look, as conservatives, we boycotted some woke products. I think we should boycott arsenic as well. I mean, that's universal. Everyone really should agree to that. Again, exposingtoxicfoods.com. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to more of your work and discoveries.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate your time.
God bless. So, folks, again, that was First Lady Casey DeSantis of Florida. My gosh, wow, that is. I'm just so excited because I feel like everything else we try to do, we hit a brick wall that we don't have political agency to change. But here you actually have control of one state, a large state, so there is more funding there. It's not a tiny state. And they're actually trying to just do good. I mean, this is the sort of thing really everyone should support. We could debate the role of government, but if you're going to have departments of health, this should be the core of what they do. Not necessarily banning or mandating, just simply, hey, this is what we're finding. You can do what you want. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, if I had findings on plastic cups right now, I personally use them a lot. They're convenient. They just are, especially when you have a lot of kids. But if I would see the data, I'd be like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe that's not worth it. But again, none of this happens without leadership. When have we ever heard anyone doing this? We haven't. And whether it's the data centers, oh, well, there's one guy leading on that. The ballot initiatives of the left, one guy fighting them. Property taxes, one guy fighting it. COVID, one guy. Street level immigration enforcement, one guy. So as you look forward to the Florida governor's race and other governor's races as well, ask yourself, do you really think the candidates that have the most money and are shoved in your feed by the algorithms or, on the airwaves with all their money from the special interest they get, precisely because the special interests know they're not really going to be a threat to the system, do you really think they would have done, those candidates would have done, and I'm thinking of one in particular in Florida, what DeSantis has spearheaded with this and many other issues? Let me just give you one more example. This ties a little bit into health, a lot of it into health, if you think about it. Marijuana. So we now see, I mean, I live in a blue state and I see it. You have zombies all over the place. You have drunk people. We think drunk in terms of alcohol, but basically DUI on marijuana, driving in the left lane. It smells across the entire beltway, in the DC beltway, Baltimore beltway, all these blue cities. I mean, that's a big thing not spoken about, the car crashes from it, but it's just the quality of life is terrible. And the marijuana lobby has hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're pushing in every red state that has a citizens initiative petition process, and in Florida too. And they almost succeeded. Who else would have fought it but DeSantis? So anyway, the news that came out last week is that the Attorney General James Uffmeyer, also a product of DeSantis alumni, he announced that, first of all, not only thanks to their work fighting it and creating reform statutorily, a higher bar to meeting the threshold to get on the ballot, did the universal weed on every street corner not make it to the ballot, but they actually arrested people for fraud. As we're talking about the SAVE Act, voter fraud, a big fraud that we're finding now is in petition circulations. Do you know how much transformation has happened in red states? Minimum wage, Medicaid expansion, jailbreak. In Oklahoma, we had that stupid law, that the California style law, where they downgraded theft, and they had a bunch of theft, and they had marijuana there too. How many of these even properly achieved the threshold? And it turns out there's a ton of fraud. Florida's the only state going after that fraud. So, all 22 active proposed constitutional amendment changes by initiative petitions failed to meet the 2026 ballot in Florida. How about that for leadership? Again, that would not have happened had other people won the primary. So choose wisely, headed forward. Let me know your comments, questions, concerns on exposing toxic foods. We'll get back to some of the more traditional political stuff tomorrow, but I want to do more shows like this just because I feel like this is the best we can do public service. We might not be able to change laws and policy, but maybe we could change our own behavior if we're simply empowered with the truth. Make sure you like and subscribe our page on YouTube, Horowitz Show on YouTube. Obviously, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you go. Daniel Horowitz at Liberating Truths on Substack as well. Till tomorrow, God bless you all. and thank you for listening.